Okay, so welcome to our old growth forest field trip. We're at the Asahel Nature Trail, which is located right off of I-90, so you can probably hear the traffic in the background. So this is an absolutely beautiful trail. If you get an opportunity to visit it, please take advantage of that opportunity. I'll be pointing out some of the characteristics of an old growth forest as we move along. Okay, so this is more the formal start of the trail. We have a couple of creeks coming down that we cross over. This is a mature Douglas fir forest. It's a rare patch of old growth forest located in the Snoqualmie Valley. An old growth forest is typically over 200 to 400 years old. That doesn't mean everything in it is that old. It means it has a lot of these old trees. It has a complex structure, and when we talk about forests, we talk about layers. And I'm going to simplify it to three basic layers. There's the ground cover, what's growing on the ground. There's the understory, which is the middle layer. And then there's the canopy, which is the top layer. Now, old growth forests tend to be patchy, meaning that there are areas that have been opened up due to storms blowing down trees, creating open areas where new growth can come up, so you get younger areas intermixed with older areas. And the community varies depending about the age. So we're going to continue on now. So we're crossing over this creek, and I wanted to stop and show you a large tree. This is blowdown. We get a lot of this in a forest. This is a wet forest, and so the root balls of these trees tend to be shallow. They don't need to put their roots down deep to get to the moisture, but it means that they're more susceptible to being blown down. It does create habitat, creates open areas. And here's the downstream side. And we can see that in this area we have a lot of hemlock. And come in, here's a branch of hemlock. And this is characterized by the unequal length of the needles as they're spread across the branch, and if you flip them over, they have a very white underneath side to them. And here, I'm going to back out a bit, you can see the varied size of the trunks of these trees, so we have a wide range of age classes, which is very typical of an old growth forest. So we have a very large Douglas fir right in the middle of this shot, surrounded by a couple of younger Doug firs, as well as the western hemlock. So here's a very nice area where we can look at some of the ground cover. You get a lot of moss. We also have some bunchberry, and we have some twin flower growing in this area. And we'll continue on with our walk. So we have a very nice example. We've got here the ground cover, got some false azalea, moss. And as we move up, you see our understory. This is the western hemlock. And then our canopy way up there, and that's Douglas fir. Now, Douglas fir seedlings need a lot of sunlight, and so down here we don't see a lot of Douglas fir seedlings coming up. The smaller trees that we see are shade-tolerant trees, which are the western hemlock and western red cedar. So in an old growth forest, typically you'll find Doug firs, the very, very tall trees, and you'll find the younger ones at edge habitats where there's been a disturbance, some blowdowns, creating that sunny area. So here is a small tree that I particularly wanted to show you. It's right in the center here. Doesn't look particularly impressive, but it's unique to our old growth forest. It is the yew tree, Pacific yew tree, Taxus brevifolia, and it's identifiable a couple of different ways, and we'll walk up to it here and get a closer look at the branches. And so you see here the needles. Zoom in. And you can see they've got this pointed tip to them. They come to a bit of a rounded end, and then it goes into a point. And that is identifiable trait for the yew. And then the bark. It has this very sort of shreddy, flaky red bark. And so that is the Pacific yew tree. And again, this is a source of Taxol, which is a breast cancer drug. Now this is a wet old growth forest, and so we're starting to move into a very wet area where we see some plants that are typical for wet areas and wetlands. In particular, here we have that deer fern. We have several of them, and remember, deer fern have these rounded, they're bipinnate with rounded ends to the leaflets, and the majority of the fronds are sterile, don't produce spores, but they have these taller reproductive fronds which do produce the spores. Okay, so now we're going to cross over a very wet area, and we can look here and see skunk cabbage and another plant right here in the center, which is devil's club and has very large leaves and thorns. Very nasty plant. You don't really want to get too close to the devil's club. And if we look down here, we can see quite a bit of deer fern, skunk cabbage, and devil's club, all indicating this is a wetland, and so we've got a forested wetland in the middle of our old growth area. And then right off to the side here, we have a very large part of a western red cedar, and we can identify it by that stringy red bark. And so going up, you can see that's very tall. Cedars can get up to about 200 feet tall. Okay, so we'll continue on. So here we see some conch fungi that are growing out of the end of a large blowdown here that they've sawn and to clear out the portion of the trail. But you can see the decomposition process starting here. And if we look over, here's another blowdown. Has some different sorts of fungi growing out of it. So again, recycling of nutrients, the nutrient cycle that naturally occurs in the forest. So here's another ground cover community. And here we have a few new members. We've got a vanilla leaf or two, and they have these 3 leaves coming out with sort of moose antler shape to them. And they have bunchberry around them. The bunchberry are the little 4-leafed plants coming up. And then twin flower growing around the base of them. And then down here, we have some more deer fern. And as we get a little bit more upslope, we're now seeing some Oregon grape. And so they have, this is a compound leaf, so it looks like a branch with a number of leaves on it. Is actually one leaf. The leaflets are serrated, look a lot like English holly leaves, but this is our native Oregon grape. And up the trail, we've got on the left side this rock, and if you look carefully in the center, you'll see a stump that appears to be sort of coming out of the rock. This is a western hemlock that started out in the duff, the loose organic material on the surface of the rock, and as it grew, the roots extended to grow around the rock, and this is a living, healthy western hemlock perched on top of this rock. So here's a sword fern, and we always think of sword ferns as being our most common fern in the Pacific Northwest, but this is an area where we haven't seen very many. It's been more dominated by the deer ferns because of the wetness of this area. So we have this open area that's been created partly by the trail, and we start to see some small trees sprouting here, and we have some cedar, western red cedar, hemlock, but we also are seeing a new tree, and it's this one in the middle here, characterized by the very flat arrangement of the needles on the leaves. This is a Pacific silver fir, and we're starting to see these because we're at an elevation. We're close to a couple thousand feet up in the mountains, and so as we see this change in elevation, we also start to see plants that are adapted more to that elevation. And if we come in here and do a close-up of the needles, you can see that they're very flat arrangement on the branch, and underneath very white. This is what gets it the name of silver fir. So Pacific silver fir. We have rounded tips to the needles. So we see more and more Pacific silver fir at this elevation. And what starts to disappear as we go further up is the Douglas fir, western hemlock. Western hemlock starts to be replaced by mountain hemlock. So at this point we're in a transitional phase, and so we have both. We also have next to it a red huckleberry, which we've seen at some other locations. So we'll continue on, and just to remind you that, yep, the canopy's still there. These big trees are still there, even though most of my shots seem to be focusing more down at trail level. So here's a great example of a nurse log. We can see the downed log there with all of the plants growing out of it. We have western hemlock, quite a few of them. We also have some red huckleberry, but also some salal. Those are the rounded leathery leaves you see, and a great deal of moss. So a returning of the nutrients. And here I am right next to a very large Douglas fir. You can see the cragginess of the bark. This is probably about an 8-foot diameter at breast height, and extending on up. You notice it doesn't have lower branches. Those branches, the lower branches gradually fall off because they don't get sufficient sunlight to produce enough sugars through photosynthesis, And so gradually these older trees just have the upper branches. So here's an example of a snag. We go up. It only goes up for about 12 or 15 feet. And this makes a great habitat. It also provides nutrients and food and shelter for a variety of insects, fungi, and all sorts of critters. So that's an example of a snag. So this is an area called the Avenue of the Giants because there are so many of these standing, very large trees coming down this slope. And we can see a variety of species, western hemlock, Douglas fir, predominating with large trees. And if we swing around and look at some of the smaller trees coming up, western hemlock, again shade tolerant. And so down here you can see more western hemlock. And then right next to me, very big Douglas fir. So here we can see that as trees fall, they tend to shatter, and so you get a lot of organic material. I wanted to look at this particular area because what we've seen mostly are these deer fern, lots and lots of deer fern. But here we also have some spiny wood fern coming up. And then back here, another sword fern. So we've got several types of ferns here, but again, it's a wet area, so what is dominating is all of this deer fern. The other thing that I wanted to look at, we're late in the season, it's October. This is a little foam flower plant here in the center, and it is trying to put some flowers out still. So this is one of our native wildflowers. Sometimes you get later blooms on the wildflowers as you move up in elevation because they get a later start. So here's a great example of a root ball. So we can see the tree going down the slope. That's the root ball. Again, shallow root ball because they don't need to put their roots down very far. There's so much moisture near the surface. It does, however, make them susceptible to blow down during windstorms. And of course these root balls are great habitat. So we've got western hemlock growing out of them. We've got ferns coming out of them. So it's a tremendous habitat. And then here's another example of a root ball. So here's another ground cover habitat. I showed you Oregon grape earlier, just one little plant, but here's an area where it has found conditions very suitable, and so we see quite a bit of Oregon grape growing here. And remember, this is a compound leaf, so this is one leaf here, this entire thing with all these little leaflets coming off. And the leaflets have the sharp, pointy projections, look a bit like English holly, which is not a native plant. And if we look, we're coming up on a little seep coming out of the hillside, and as a result, a wet area. We've got skunk cabbage and we've got devil's club. And you'll notice both the skunk cabbage and the devil's club are turning yellow because it is October, and so they are starting to die back. They will die back over the winter. The deer fern and the Oregon grape, however, do not die back. They will remain. So here is a vine maple. Vine maples you'll find in old growth forests, generally in areas that are getting some sunlight. This one is starting to turn and drop its leaves, but vine maple has the smaller leaves compared to the big leaf maple, and the leaves tend to have 5 to 7 lobes on them. Fungi are decomposers. And so here again we have a downed log, and you can see all of this growth of fungi along here. And then we come around to the end. This is just spectacular, I think. So we get a look at this. I'll back out a bit here. So, recycling of nutrients in action. So I pointed out a shorter snag earlier. Right in the center of this is a snag. And if we follow it up, 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 and you can see the top. This is a very tall snag, and again, this is producing habitat and nutrients for a lot of organisms. So snags play an important role in the forest. I'll zoom out a bit here so you can see plenty of young growth going on, lots of saplings coming up, younger trees alongside the older trees. So it's that heterogeneity of age classes, young, old, with the oldest being 200 to 400 years old, that defines an old growth forest. Here's a great example of what happens over time when you have a tree growing out of a nurse log. If we look here, we can see the hemlock with the roots surrounding what had been organic material. And we've got our wet area down there. So we'll just do a quiet walk through a bit of this forest. And so we'll end our visit to the old growth forest here by the stream where we entered. It almost drowns out the sound of the Interstate 90 traffic. Hope you enjoyed this, and see you at the next video.